All of this renewed activity in England would have Kate Bush fans hoping that this bodes well for some future live performances, especially here in North America.
I think a lot of people tend to assume I don't like doing live performances because it's been so long since the tour that we did. But it's really, my other commitments are just too involved. Since then, the albums have taken longer and longer progressively. And with videos and promotion that goes immediately after an album, I just haven't felt the time or the space to really get one together because it would take a long time to pull it together. But I would like to, yes, very much so. And I have really wanted to since the last one. But it just hasn't really been the time. But I'm hoping that it will feel right and that time will come again.
You've built your own studio and you're working from that now.
Yes, the difference that makes is phenomenal. It's one of the best decisions I've ever made, was to get that studio, because automatically I relaxed and could put the ideas straight onto tape, which, again, I just could not afford to do when working in a commercial studio. It's so expensive. You have to work out a lot before you go in, and then there's not time to experiment and change things as much as you like. Or if you do, the pressure of what it's costing, I think, actually becomes anti-productive.
I'm interested in how your songwriting process works. When you're trying to communicate with other musicians and tell them exactly what you want, do you give them the tape on cassette?
It very much depends on the musician. Some people would not want to come into the studio without having had a cassette that they could listen to and work some ideas out on. But normally what happens is the musician comes in, you play the track, which would have the basics on it. I'm sort of work backwards to most people in a lot of ways, in that the bass quite often goes on nearly as one of the last instruments. So the track they would hear would have drums, piano, voice, a few keyboards, even guitar sometimes. And quite often now we have a very good atmosphere going on the tape before the musician comes in. So although it might be very rough what's on there, it's a strong mood of what it will be like at the end. You know, it's got all the feelings in there. And it's just a matter of tarting it up.
Yeah, because you don't want to lose that atmosphere. Right?
Yes, it's very difficult to recreate things like that. And that's what's so good for me about being able to write straight onto tape. You might get some really dodgy things, and quite often I do, but there might be just something in there that was so spontaneous you probably wouldn't be able to do again in the same way, and it's there on tape.
This year, Kate released The Whole Story, which is both a home video album and a compilation record of all her biggest hits, and one new track, Experiment 4. She also re-recorded the vocals for Wuthering Heights.
I wanted to put a contemporary mark on it. I felt it sounded like a very little girl singing that to me. And the production was very much a 70s production. And although there were some other tracks on there that you could say the same thing of, they weren't as blatant as that one was. If I'd have had the time, I probably would have done the same to some of the other tracks, but there was just no time. There was too much to do with recording and writing Experiment 4 plus doing the video. It was a very, very intense period to get that out on the deadline.
Where do you think your main strength lies? In your family or your music?
I think that's a very difficult question, because my family are very important to me and have been around since I was born, whereas my music is something that came much later. But there's such a personal involvement with my music that's very much inspired by people, but it's a very private thing, and it's very much a release for me. I think I get a tremendous amount of support from my family, which is very important to me. And I don't know if music supports you. It's not necessarily a comforting thing, but it's like a very close friend, I guess.
The two videos that you're most pleased with, the ones you like, are Running Up That Hill and Army Dreamers. What was it that you didn't feel you liked about the other ones?
I have a couple of favourites since that.
Oh, good.
But the main problem is that when you write a song, you write it as a song and not as something that's visual. So quite often there isn't a visual story contained in a song in the way that should be to actually put on film. Budgets are a particular problem. It costs a lot of money. And time, usually it's such a rush job to get it together. But more recently we've been trying to get them done as much up front as possible and spend more time, effort and money on them.
What are your new favorites?
I was quite pleased with Cloudbusting and Experiment 4, and particularly with them and Army Dreamers, there was very much a visual story that was adequate for film rather than it just being putting a song, a song together. They very much had visual information in them that worked well on film.
Is the combination of unlike things, a kind of oxymoron, something you apply to your visual work as well as your music?
They are very similar processes, but they're not. The way you approach them is completely different. With sound, for me, what I'm trying to create is very much the atmosphere, the mood of what the song has sort of designated. It does. It automatically creates its own personality in a way. Mm. And then it's a matter of treating that personality the way that it wants to. Quite often you think of things that would be nice to try on a track and you put them on and the track just won't accept it. It just won't work. So, there are only certain things it will have. But visually it's more, it's not so much a layering process as the jigsaw, putting it all together. It's not quite the same way of layering things up that you do in sound. Mm.
Sometimes all these different images almost look surreal. I'm thinking of the roller skaters in the white gowns and the dunce caps. Was that just a neat combination of things, or does it all add up to some point?
I think very much with that one, it was the combination. It was a kind of silly video, really, where we wanted it to be slightly comical, and it was playing with different images of knowledge, really, and lack of knowledge, i.e. people like dunces and jesters, and it was a bit of a romp, where there was just loads of people involved, and 1 minute you're here and the next minute you're there, very much just images put together to try and make it fun more than anything.
Obviously you're someone that feels that the world of dance and the world of rock can coexist, but does dance absorb rock better than rock absorbs dance?
I think that's there's a very sort of basic logic to that, in that if you dance, it's very, very unusual to dance without music. Dance is always something that is done to music. That's what dance is about, the rhythm of, even if it's just someone tapping out rhythms on a drum, that is still music, it's sound. And dance works hand in hand with sound. And I think music can stand on its own, but in some cases, what it makes you want to do is dance. So
I think Running Up That Hill is one of the better examples of how dance can be used well in rock music.
It's really nice that you think that, because very much what we wanted to try and achieve was to make it a serious piece of dance, which I didn't feel I'd done up until that point. I'd played around with dance, but in a very sort of theatrical way, and in some ways it was sort of saying goodbye to that dancing side of me by doing it, in a very sort of pure way. It's very much a pure dance video without any theatre or anything attached. And because I feel very much a shift now from dance into film imagery. So they're two very different things. Not that dance couldn't still be incorporated, but it's not the same attitude.
When Mozart was 17, he was playing for the crowned heads of Europe. When Kate Bush was 17, she had her first hit single with Wuthering Heights. I asked her how spending those 10 years as a successful pop singer influenced her art.
I'm not convinced they are the most influential years, I must say. I think when you're a kid, they're incredibly influential. I mean, so many writers, I don't know about singers, but from a creative point of view, you're always drawing back to things way in your childhood. But a lot of things have changed for me in that period you were talking about, and I think it's been incredibly useful for me to be successful during this time, in that I've been able to work with people and find sources of information that perhaps I wouldn't have otherwise. Unfortunately, so much of what we do in this business is based on money, equipment. It's all very expensive. So if you are successful, you stand the chance of having more of this equipment available, and that does definitely affect the way you work.
Listening to your albums from the very first to the most recent, there's a change in your voice, and it seems that your voice is lower and a little more aggressive, as if you're working harder at punching out the lyrics.
Lyrics have always been very important for me, and you know, all people go through phases of things they try out, and at that period when I made the first album, I was very much experimenting with a higher vocal range. It was just something I wanted to try out. And also the production has a tremendous amount to do with things like that. But my voice has changed a lot, and I think that is basically what I see as the difference, that as I've grown up, my voice has grown up with me, it's become stronger, and I can do things now with my voice that were not easy for me to do, years ago.
Has your voice lost any of its range?
I can get up there if I need to, but I just prefer working in this range now. I think a lot of females go through that. If you listen to Joni Mitchell, her early stuff is very high, and with each album she gets lower and lower. So, it's just a progressive thing for people, I think.
I've been noticing a little theme of science in the last few songs you've had out. Cloud busting was an experiment that went very well, but experiment 4 was one that went wrong. But in both cases, the scientists were sympathetic characters, but they were frustrated and manipulated. Is that what you think about scientists?
I don't think it's always what I think about scientists, but I think they're fascinating in that so often they're trying to create something that they consider positive, productive, and very much something that will help mankind. But so often along the way, those good intentions end up being used, particularly by other people, for completely the opposite reasons. Particularly experiments that end up being used by the military. Things like the atom bomb. I mean, I can see that perhaps when the guy was originally playing with that idea, he had no idea where he would end up, and that I'm sure he didn't actually have evil intentions in his head initially. He was so caught up, so obsessed with the pure level of the science that he didn't actually realize how it could be used.
What do you think about scientific experimentation? Are there limits to the things that people should be working with?
Well, I think that's very much part of the fascination, is that I think people have to do that. That's what human beings are about, discovering things. And perhaps the problem is that they're normally always connected by forces that do not have that same kind of creative curiosity. The consequences, that's the problem, the consequences are quite often thought of in hindsight rather than on the way. I consider music a really positive force. It's something that is there to help people, to make them happy, to make them think. So many wonderful things, music therapy. It's a very positive energy, and there's something incredibly beautiful about music. And the thought of people using sound in such a negative way, which, there are definitely sonic experiments that go on that are used by the military, is so obscene, and the irony of using something that's so beautiful in a way to actually kill people rather than help them, I found fascinating.
A lot of your songs and videos are filled with frightening or disquieting images. Are you an uneasy person?
I think anyone that has any kind of creative outlet is uneasy, and that's what makes them need to express themselves. I think all human beings are uneasy on some level, and how can you not be when we don't really know what we're doing here or what we're meant to do with it? So there's the continual questioning going on.